Good morning. My name is Karen Seymour Ells, and I serve as a trustee here at DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. We want to welcome everyone this morning to our open and inclusive virtual community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and we pledge to support one another as we walk these paths. We are so glad you were able to find us and join us this morning for our live stream service. Please check the church website at dupageuchurch.org for updates. If you search under DuPage UU Church on Facebook, you will find a number of ways to be in community with us as well. I have an additional announcement, Science Sunday. We would love for you to join us today at noon for Science Sunday. Join with our YouTube link that appears on the church website. The same link used to join this service. Next Sunday, we will again have our Zoom coffee hour. The Zoom link can be found on the Members tab of our website and in the weekly church email. Auction 2020, Star Trek. Have you boldly gone where no one has gone before for Auction 2020? Bought your ticket? $5. Donated items, viewed the calendar of parties and events. At dupageuchurch.org/auction 2020, you'll find information leading to auction tickets, donations, suggested offerings, and how to create a profile for viewing and bidding on auction items. There will be access to bid Friday, November 6th through noon on Sunday, November 8th, and a cool Zoom party in the middle. That sounds like fun. On Saturday, November 7th, look for the link to Auction 2020 information under quick links on the church website homepage, in emails coming your way, and in the October newsletter. Help DuPage UU Church live long and prosper while offering and purchasing great stuff.
We light our chalice this morning for the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Our opening words this morning are The Peace of Autumn by Rabindranath Tagore. Today, the peace of autumn pervades the world. In the radiant noon, silent and motionless, the wide stillness rests like a tired bird, spreading over the deserted fields to all horizons its wings of bright green. Today, the thin thread of the river flows without song, leaving no mark on its sandy banks. The many distant villages bask in the sun with eyes closed in idle and languid slumber. In the stillness, I hear, in every blade of grass, in every speck of dust, in every part of my own body, in the visible and invisible worlds, in the planets, the sun, and the stars, I hear the joyous dance of the atoms through endless time. Thank you for joining us this morning as we continue to explore our monthly theme of deep listening. There will be 2 opportunities for journaling later in the service, one after each part of the sermon. When you are able to during the service, please find paper and a pen or pencil so that you are ready. And now I invite you to join us in the opening hymn, number 90, titled, "From All the Fret and Fever of the Day."
Join us in singing the affirmations of this church. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
It is time to gather. Our theme this month is deep listening, and today I have a story about listening to nature, and the character in the story is Henry David Thoreau at Walden Pond. Henry sat in front of his little cabin on one of his 3 chairs, listening to the evening. If you were there, you might have thought there was nothing to listen to. Certainly, no television or iPod. Those wouldn't be around for 100 years or more. There was no one to talk with, no airplanes overhead, no radio coming from next door. Well, Mr. Emerson's house, the closest thing to a next door neighbor, was over a mile away. Not that he had a radio to play either. Even the natural world was still. No wind rippled the pond, and the birds had stopped singing as night approached. Still, Henry listened for the tiniest sounds. A small fish breaking the surface of the water and splashing down again. the crackle of leaves as a mouse passed by, the sound of wings as a crow passed overhead. To him, these miniature sounds were music. Of course, most of the townspeople thought Henry David Thoreau was crazy when he decided to build a tiny cabin from used materials out of Emerson's woodlot by Walden Pond. Why would a promising writer want to move away from society to sit with birds and bugs for company? In fact, Henry enjoyed the company of Emerson and the other thinkers who shared his transcendentalist philosophy. However, to him, the quiet of the pond and the animals and plants that lived in and around it provided excellent company. Sometimes Henry thought the conversation you learn the most is from the one in which the least is said. As he watched the last rays of light glisten on the pond, Henry thought about the biblical story about the prophet Elijah, who crawled off to a mountain cave to listen for what God wanted him to do. And while Elijah stood outside of his cave, a great wind whipped around the mountains, sending boulders crashing to the ground in the fury of its passing. But God wasn't in the wind. Then an earthquake rattled the mountain with a terrific rumbling. But God wasn't in the earthquake. Then came a fire, sweeping across the rocks and brush outside the cave, red and roaring and grand. But God wasn't in the fire either. Finally, after all the roaring and crashing, everything became quiet. And Elijah stood there shaking, wrapped in his cloak, just waiting. And out of the silence came the still, small voice of his God. I'm not sure of all that, thought Henry, that I believe in God of the Bible, the one who chatted with Elijah. But whatever God is, I'm pretty sure I know it better out here in the quiet than I would through any ranting sermon. Maybe God is speaking to me in the small voice of the jumping fish and the rustling leaves, the still pond, and the stars beginning to peek through the trees. Maybe I hear God when my heart is still and I can listen with my very smallest inner ear. Maybe. And his thoughts drifted off with a small breeze that came and ruffled his hair and rippled across the quiet lake. Please join us in singing our next hymn, number 69 in the gray hymnal, Give Thanks.
Give thanks for the corn and the let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream. The offering for the works of this church will now be taken and gratefully received.
Don't Give Up on America by Marilynne Robinson. What does it mean to love a country? I have spent most of my life studying American history and literature because of a deep, if sometimes difficult, affinity I would call love. Deeper, though, is a feeling like a love of family, a hope that whoever, by whatever accident or choice, falls under the definition of family, will thrive and will experience even a difficult life as a blessing, because his or her worth is a fact without conditions. A family would take practical steps to ease one another through hard times and to preserve the integrity of home as a special refuge. The honor of a family would consist in a very generous acknowledgement of claims on its loyalty and care. It is often said that America is an idea, stated definitively in early documents left to us by a coterie of men seemingly too compromised to have come up with such glorious language, as we would be too if we should happen to achieve anything comparable. Human beings are sacred and therefore equal. We are asked to see one another in the light of a singular, inalienable worth that would make a family of us if we let it. The ethic in these words should be the standard by which we judge ourselves, our social arrangements, our dealings with the vast family of humankind. It will always find us wanting. The idea is a progressive force, constantly and necessarily exposing our failures and showing us new paths forward.
For alongside our famous individualism, there's another ingredient in the American saga, a belief that we're all connected as one people. If there's a child on the south side of Chicago who can't read, that matters to me even if it's not my child. If there's a senior citizen somewhere who can't pay for their prescription drugs and having to choose between medicine and the rent, that makes my life poorer even if it's not my grandparent. If there's an Arab American family being rounded up without benefit of an attorney or due process, that threatens my civil liberties. It is that fundamental belief. It is that fundamental belief, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, that makes this country work. It's what allows us to pursue our individual dreams and yet still come together as one American family. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us. The spin masters, the negative ad peddlers, who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states, red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. There are patriots who opposed the war in Iraq, and there are patriots who supported the war in Iraq. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Dr. Miriam Renaud, the community minister affiliated with this congregation. It's great to be back with you again. In March of 2008, civil rights icon John Lewis said this to the congregation assembled at Washington National Cathedral. We truly believe that through discipline and nonviolence, through the power of peace and the power of love, we could transform this nation into something Martin Luther King Jr. called a beloved community. This was our conscious goal. We worked, we struggled, and we suffered to make that dream a reality. You probably know that beloved community is an idea that harkens not just to Martin Luther King Jr., but to the American philosopher Josiah Royce, who was born in 1855 and died in 1916. Throughout his career, Royce wrote on ethical theory and on the conditions for creating both genuine and supportive communities. He was concerned about the impact of extreme individualism, and particularly with the heroic individualism associated with believe it or not, the likes of Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and yes, Henry David Thoreau. What are these two ideas, beloved and community? And what happens when we combine them? Royce developed an entire philosophy of community and assigned a technical meaning to beloved community, which I encourage you to research. In general terms, though, a community can be described as a circle of deep, horizontal comradeship. Sometimes communities are handed to us, like our work community or our neighborhood community. Beloved confers a special status to community. It is usually a community that we have chosen, and beloved signals that it has special meaning and importance for us. My sense is that this is what Martin Luther King Jr. meant when he spoke of beloved community. It bears thinking about whom we include in the circle of beloved community. To do so seems especially important at this moment, given that a national election is already underway. Some of you draw your circle of deep horizontal comradeship around Unitarian Universalists, or around left-leaning Democrats, or around any number of people with whom you share values and interests and history. But I wonder whether we should limit beloved community to those with whom we find it easy to spend time. Is beloved community intended to be effort-free, or does it require something more from us? If your circle of beloved community includes only people whose political affiliation or stances on various political issues mostly match your own, then I suspect that on November 4th, the day after the upcoming election, you may have one of two reactions. If you are a Biden supporter and the Biden-Harris ticket captures the White House, you may erupt into ecstatic celebration. You may also yield to the impulse to gloat and to figuratively or literally give the finger of honor, as the French put it, to Trump-supporting voters. Or if you're a Democrat and Republicans retain the White House, you may sink into deep loathing, or more likely into even deeper loathing, of Trump voters, whether they are your uncle or your boss or your spouse, because they've imposed on you 4 more years of a Trump administration. Reverse everything I just said if you are a Trump supporter. And yes, there are Unitarian Universalist Republicans, though they often remain in the closet about their party affiliation, because to do otherwise puts them at risk of being shunned or shamed or pushed outside of beloved community. I'm now going to ask you to spend 5 minutes in quiet reflection as you write about who you include in your circle of beloved community, or better yet, whom you include, who's in and who's out, and why. You might even draw a circle and label stick figures inside and outside the circle. During these 5 minutes, you will hear, though you're welcome to mute the sound if you find it distracting, a piece of music by Royer that was selected for a New York Times article about Baroque music. It was selected by pianist Alexandre Tarot. Here is Tarot explaining his choice of Royer's L'Aimable for this article. I have always thought that my profession was that of a nurse who spreads ointment on wounds, soothes people, makes them forget the passing of time. Royer's L'Aimable, a piece from the distant era of Versailles, is like a caress of an infinite tenderness. Listen to L'Aimable and you will be consoled. Listen to L'Aimable and you will feel deeply serene. Your anger will give way to a feeling of fullness. In these minutes, Warrior achieved this miracle, delivering so much love with disarming simplicity, with a warm and welcoming melody. And so, as you write about who is in and who is out of your beloved community, may this piece of music offer to you a warm and welcoming melody. you surprised perhaps at the picture you drew or the words you wrote? What do you think about the deep horizontal comradeship that is your beloved community, now that you've had a chance to think about who's inside and who's outside of it? Let's return to John Lewis. Here's how he continued his sermon at the Washington National Cathedral in 2008. If Martin Luther King Jr. were here today, he would still be saying we are all in this together. He would be saying that it doesn't matter whether we are Black or white or Hispanic or Asian American or Native American, whether we are Democrats or Republicans or independent. We are one people. We are one house. We are one family. It doesn't matter. We have to find a way to live together. We have to find a way to understand each other. We have to find a way to make peace with each other. King then, on John Lewis's telling, did not draw a line around African Americans or anti-racists or Democrats when he thought about beloved community. He said of the United States, we are one people. We are one house. We are one family. He insisted that we must extend our circle of deep horizontal comradeship beyond those whom we find easy to love. To practice the power of love does not mean that we must agree with everyone, but it does mean that we try as best we can to make peace with one another, and barring that, to at least show respect, to try to go high every time. I want to return to the very first time I quoted John Lewis in the first part of my sermon, where he talked about the commitments on which he drew as he worked to shape the country into a beloved community, in spite of the cruelty and the ignorance and the stack system he encountered. We truly believed that through discipline and nonviolence, through the power of peace and the power of love, that we could transform this nation into something Martin Luther King Jr. called a beloved community. This was our conscious goal. We worked, we struggled, and we suffered to make that dream a reality. Historian John Meacham wrote about the Lewis sermon that I just quoted, and he gave voice to what some of you are probably thinking. So easy to say, so easy to quote, but there's nothing harder to do, nothing harder to put into action, nothing harder to translate from sentiment to substance than the message Lewis preached that day. How then to put into action, to translate from sentiment to substance, the message that whichever candidate wins the White House, we must find a way to include those who voted differently in our beloved community, to find a way to understand each other, to make peace with each other, to do our part to be one people, one house, one family. Again, it is not lost on me that I'm borrowing the words of John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. for a struggle that is rather inconsequential compared to their struggle to advance the cause of desegregation and voting rights and safety for all. These and many other leaders worked, sacrificed, and suffered for decades to transform this nation into a beloved community. And many, including some of you, struggle still. Leaders like Lewis, as he himself said, relied on discipline and nonviolence and the power of peace and the power of love. Can we do any less at this moment in time and post-election? Can we exercise discipline and treat others who did not vote for a favored candidate in a peaceful, even loving way? How prepared and committed are we to work on the conscious goal of exercising the power of peace and of love? Are we prepared to give up something, such as our conviction that we cannot forgive, to contribute to make a post-election United States a beloved community? Royce, and I think this is important, would not have tried to explain away or lessen the reality of all that is wrong in this election and in this country at the moment. Given the fact of evil, if that's what we're going to call it, Royce believed that the most important question concerned how we ought to respond. His answer was that we should adopt an attitude of loyalty to goodness and truth, which he considered real forces in the world. The loyal member of a genuine community he held, confronts evil and wills to overcome it through the very fact of loyalty to its opposite. For Royce, the highest moral achievements have involved the loyalty by individuals to ideals that promote the formation and expansion of beloved community. Evil could never be eradicated, he held, which is another way of saying that loyalty to goodness and truth is a lost cause. But Royce was convinced that though the success of this high cause is out of reach, the meaning of our response is manifest in our lives. This seems a good time to bring up our Unitarian Universalist principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. What can this principle mean when it comes to the current election cycle? This principle calls on us to show respect for the dignity of others, including for those with whom we disagree completely on political issues. Most civil rights leaders were Christian ministers, Lewis and King included, and they drew on their strong religious faith as they worked toward making this country a beloved community. Most likely they focused on the idea that all human beings are made in the image of God, Imago Dei, a good reason to treat others with respect, whether we feel they deserve it or not. Barack Obama, who just published another book, A Promised Land, writes of his conviction that democracy is not a gift from on high, but something founded on empathy and common understanding and built together day by day. I would now like to pause again and write for 5 minutes. I ask you to reflect, to ask yourselves what you could personally draw on to show empathy and respect in the days ahead. Some of you draw on nature for spiritual nourishment. How will your communion with nature foster in you a commitment to community and a readiness to struggle to enlarge your circle of beloved community? And more generally, what are the theological, religious, spiritual, or ethical understandings that can guide you as you engage with others who do not vote as you do? What are the theological, religious, spiritual, ethical understandings that can inspire you as you do the hard work of expressing love for those whose political views you may find hateful? What will that love look like? I suggest that you think of someone you know personally, someone close to you who likely voted or will vote for a candidate you do not support. In my case, that would be my brother, Michael. You too may have someone in your immediate family or a close friend whose politics you find hard to stomach. I suggest that you focus on this person as you reflect on how your theology or spirituality or ethics and what it asks of you, perhaps even demands, that you practice love, or at the very least, respect. As you spend 5 minutes writing out your answers, you will hear, though again you're welcome to mute the sound if you find the music distracting, a piece of Baroque music that New York Times editor Joshua Barone shared in that same article about Baroque music that I mentioned in the first part of my sermon. He chose this piece by Bach because in the 13th variation from the Goldberg Variations, Barone says, and I'm quoting, "Multiple voices land inevitably in satisfying balance. Yet you don't need to know anything of its structural ingenuity to be moved by the melody's tension of tranquility and longing, resonant in this moment perhaps, and comforting." May you similarly hear in this piece multiple voices that land in satisfying balance. I close now with these words by Frederick E. Gillis, which comes from the reading number 694 in our hymnal. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always, and so may it be.
Go forth in simplicity. Find and walk the path that leads to compassion and wisdom, that leads to happiness, peace, and ease. Welcome the stranger and open your heart to a world in need of healing. Be courageous before the forces of hate. Hold and embody a vision of the common good that serves the needs of all people.